Welcome to Cinema Tech Review. Today we'll be reviewing the Sony F2.8 macro lens. If at any point during the review you want to check out this exact same lens, there are Amazon links below for the US, UK, Canada, and international links. But let's jump into it. The lens sells for around $550 and comes with front and rear lens caps. It's a very compact design at only 2.8 inches long and 8.3 ounces. There are no lens hoods available for this lens. Because of the way the lens extends when macro focusing, a lens hood would not work. The Sony is designed for the full-frame Sony E-mount mirrorless cameras and works equally well on the APS-C cameras, where it has a 75mm equivalent focal length. The lens is not internally stabilized, but it does allow your Sony IBIS help with stabilization. Thankfully, the lens is dust and moisture sealed, which has really helped me a lot when using it in snow and rain. The Sony 50mm F2.8 macro is a relatively small lens that offers an impressive 1:1 magnification ratio and has a 6.3-inch minimum focusing distance. Let's take a look at what 1:1 magnification ratio actually means. The 1:1 ratio means that when photographing something 6.3 inches from the camera's sensor, the image on the camera's sensor will be the same size. For instance, if you're photographing a flower that is 1/4 of an inch around and it is 6.3 inches from the camera's sensor, the image on the sensor will be 1/4 of an inch. When I was looking at buying a macro lens, I was wondering, what's the difference between a 50mm and a 100mm lens? The difference between a 100mm 1:1 macro ratio lens and a 50mm 1:1 macro ratio lens is that the 100mm lens provides you with a greater working distance from the subject. The image size will be exactly the same. At 8.32 ounces or 236 grams, this lens has a very solid feel. The buttons on the side of the lens are all clearly marked, as well as the macro focusing distances indicated on the top of the lens. One of the interesting things about this lens is when you turn the camera off, the lens automatically tucks itself back in, allowing you to put the lens cap on. Minimum focusing distance for this lens is 6.3 inches. Focusing macro lenses can be very challenging because of the huge range of focusing from 6.3 inches to infinity. To help this, Sony has included a range limiter switch and a focus hold button. The focus range limiter switch allows you to constrain the usable focus range between 6.3 inches to 11.8 inches, from 11.8 inches to infinity, or you can switch it to full, which will allow you to focus for the full range, from 6.3 inches to infinity. The extremely wide focusing ring has a rubberized, ribbed feel to it, and easy to use in warm and cold environments. As a macro lens, I find that I use the manual focusing aspect of this lens quite a lot and love the way the bezel moves smoothly and easily. The focusing on this lens is both slow and somewhat noisy. When I bought this lens, I wanted to know if I could use this as an all-around lens. I found that extremely challenging because it's slow and noisy to focus. I have used it on a gimbal, and though I came away with some relatively good shots, it was a challenging lens to use that way. However, on a slider, it's much easier to work with. This lens, like most macro lenses, has its limitations in autofocusing. I have used this lens on an A6500 as well as a Sony A7 III and A7S III, and have found that if you are using it without your subject well lit or are focusing on something that isn't very contrasty, it will have a hard time focus tracking. Manual focus can be challenging at times as well, though can work much more easily if you let the autofocus get you within a close range of your subject, then switch over to manual focus to fine-tune that. Macro lenses work very hard focusing on a much greater range of distance than normal lenses. There are countless optional accessories that you could use with this lens, depending on the type of photography or filmmaking you want to do. A good tripod and a stable slider along with lighting are things I use quite often with my macro lens. One accessory that I particularly like and use quite a lot is the Nikon ES1 when paired with a 55 to 52 millimeter step-down ring. With this, I can very quickly and easily screw this to the end of my Sony 50mm F2.8 macro lens and copy 35 millimeter slides and negatives. Overall, I've been extremely happy with this Sony 50mm F2.8 macro lens. If you're like me and you want a macro lens that is small enough to take with you, this lens is a bargain at $550. It is one of the least expensive autofocus macro lenses on the market for Sony full-frame cameras, and it is also one of the smallest macro autofocus lenses available for full-frame cameras. Again, if you want to check out this exact same lens for yourself, there are Amazon links below for the US, UK, Canada, and international links. See you on the next video.